It's time now for Wall Street Week Daily, and Wall Street Week host David Westin spoke with Bloomberg senior Washington correspondent Saleha Mohsin, and author of Paper Soldiers: How the Weaponization of the Dollar Changed the World Order, on what it takes to make a great Treasury Secretary.
Professional experience in markets, whether it's Wall Street or some other way. You have experience in the financial regulatory sphere, in how markets work, the plumbing. That is all really important. You know, we saw that test recently in 2020 when COVID blew everything up and we had an economic crisis at hand, and we needed people to know how the Treasury market works and how businesses run, because airlines and all these companies needed help. And so having Stephen Mnuchin, who came from Goldman, understanding all of that is really important. These days, you know, it's really changed since Bob Rubin was Treasury Secretary. Compared to now, you need to have a lot of national security and foreign policy interest. No one person can have all of the expertise that you need to be Treasury Secretary today, from markets to budgets to regulation to national security. But knowing what you don't know is powerful. Having the ear of the president is powerful, and being able to speak with gravitas is powerful.
Goldman Sachs is a recurring theme through your book. And you mentioned Bob Rubin coming from Goldman Sachs, Hank Paulson, Steve Mnuchin. Will we continue to have Goldman Sachs represented, do you think, in the Treasury Secretary position?
It's hard to say. There is this theory about government Sachs, that they have produced the most leaders in the world of any big institutional bank. You can look to Mario Draghi and Malcolm Turnbull, Europe and Australia, respectively. There is pushback, and that's led from Elizabeth Warren and the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, saying that we need to watch this revolving door. And what that does in terms of groupthink and making sure that there are a wide variety of ideologies that are brought to the Treasury Department.
The Treasury Secretaries are the stars of your book in one sense. In another sense, the star of your book is the U.S. dollar itself, its strengths and sometimes maybe its not so strengths. You talked about Bob Rubin and the dollar being strong. Has that role of the U.S. dollar evolved over the time that you're reporting on?
It's changed a lot. The role of the U.S. dollar has changed a lot. If you want to look to one point in time where overnight the dollar was a focal point without people necessarily realizing it, and it shifted historically, I would say 9/11. The global war on terror that George W. Bush launched did not start with military boots on the ground or tanks or any kind of ammunition. It started at Treasury, because George W. Bush, at the end of September in 2001, signed a set of executive orders that gave Treasury the authority to start following the money to figure out how that terrorist attack was financed in order to stop other attacks from happening. So that's the moment. And it was in the wake of that that a whole new unit at Treasury was established, the Terrorism Financial Intelligence Unit, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary, was established in 2004, everything coming out of the Patriot Act after 9/11.
As you suggest, the strength of the dollar really exists in its use. But there are at least a couple of uses. One is reserve currency, as you said. Another is for transactions, as a way of denominating. I believe that those two have diverted to some extent. Reserve currency is still dollar really dominant. Not as much as it was in terms of transactions around the world, trade.
And David, at some point, these two, they've diverged, but they're going to meet back in the middle, whether they want to or not, because the less transaction you have in dollars, the less powerful the dollar as a weapon to protect American interests or hurt American interests, depends on which topic we're talking about and which side of the coin you're on. It's going to affect that.
In politics, they say you can't beat somebody with nobody. Is that true as well in currencies? That is to say, before you say something replaces the dollar, there has to be something to replace it. And who would the likely candidate be?
Absolutely. This is something that I dig into in Paper Soldiers pretty deeply, particularly toward the end, because the start of the book is February 26, 2022. And that is the moment that the U.S. levied enormous and historic sanctions against Russia, cutting off the country from SWIFT and also the central bank. it's a huge deal. It's a G20 economy, the 11th largest economy at the time, cut off from the dollar. That triggered a global rethink from both friends and foes. Are we too reliant on the dollar? Is dollar dependency going to cost us if someone in the White House disagrees with our policies? So I drive at this toward the end because de-dollarization and abandoning the dollar, or the dollar losing its sheen and shine as the world's reserve currency, has been talked about for decades, pretty much since Bretton Woods, since it was crowned as a reserve asset. But this is the first time in 80 years that we're seeing action behind that. We are seeing the central bank holdings of the dollar as a reserve asset level off, drop a little bit. We are seeing active conversations from countries that are supposed to be friends of the US and also enemies or adversaries, talking about ways to work without the dollar.